I appreciate you making the time to come out to hear a really important topic. My name is Deirdre Walsh, and I'm the Director of Marketing at Austin-based Silicon Labs. We are a semiconductor company that makes chips for Internet of Things devices like the Fitbit or the Google Nest. And I have with me an all-star group of panelists. And you can tell this is a business session because I just looked. Everybody down my row is in sports quotes, so you know that we're going to be talking some business today. But before I get started, I kind of want to set the stage for the conversation and share some things. So let's dive right in. I actually just got this data over the weekend from Edelman, which is a large global public relations agency. And for the last 30 years, they've actually done a survey on trust. And for the first time, we're actually seeing trust drop dramatically year over year in every category: NGOs, government, business, and media. But what was interesting is that the results are actually saying, in order to solve this and gain more trust, businesses need to step up more. So 64% of the people surveyed actually said they expect CEOs to take lead and to make change over the government. And so we're going to go into some examples on that. I think one of the most interesting examples comes from the Paris Climate Agreement. Right, so we all know that Trump has pulled out and said the United States isn't going to participate. However, that's made opportunity for not only more local governments, like mayors and governors to step up, but also businesses. So you have companies like HP saying, no, we're still going to follow the guidelines. And there was a recent article in Foreign Affairs last month that actually says they think we're still going to be able to make the qualifications because businesses are doing the right thing and stepping up. But it's more than just climate change. We see it across all major issues. So gun control, DACA, equal rights. And really, I think we're at this super interesting time as companies where we really have an opportunity to do more than impact the economy. We can actually start to impact society in a really meaningful way. So how many people in here have corporate social responsibility sections on their website? Okay. How many of you have either tweeted out or put a Facebook post on some sort of philanthropy or volunteer initiative that your company has done? Okay, so most, right? And those are all great. I mean, businesses have a broader communications channel than ever before, especially with social media.
For Texas, Louisiana, and Arkansas.
I'm Belinda Matingou with the Texas Association of Business, and we advocate on behalf of good public policy to support the great business climate we have here in Texas on behalf of the 2.8 million businesses in Texas. We represent over 4,000 business members in our association and over 200 chambers of commerce.
My name is Duff Stewart. I'm the CEO of GSD&M Advertising here in Austin, Texas, and we represent clients like the United States Air Force, Southwest Airlines, Goodyear, amongst others. We've been in business for about 38 years.
Awesome, thanks guys. Okay, so let's dive into it. So Belinda, I want to start with you. Since everyone in the room might not be familiar with what the bathroom bills are, can you give an overview of what these were?
Certainly. The Texas legislature meets every other year. So in 2017, in preparation for the last legislative session, some public policy issues were put forward. We, of course, said, our association said to legislators that the important things to focus on are improving access to education, our infrastructure, so we don't have gridlock on our roadways. And unfortunately, one of the major priorities that came back from some of the legislative leaders was, let's have a bathroom bill. We knew that this was bad policy. It worked out very badly for North Carolina. The actual legislation was to require that people use the bathroom of the gender assigned to them at birth in public buildings and schools. The challenges that This, of course, allows people who are transgender citizens and visitors to Texas to be targeted because they're using facilities that do not align with their lives. So we, as a business community, recognize that this was very bad public policy. I mean, many people, first started by pointing out that it's just flat out discriminatory. Because our responsibility is to advocate on behalf of a good business climate in Texas, we pointed out that it is also bad for business. It is bad for our economy. We had an economic impact study done, and we determined that based on the negative impact in terms of meeting planners and conventions that would go to other states, for example, and major sporting events like the NFL draft that's going to be in Dallas and the NCAA Final Four coming up in San Antonio, events like that would have gone away, and it would have resulted in a negative impact to the state of $5.6 billion. So, and of course, commensurate number of jobs that would be lost as a result of that. So that's the reason we formed a coalition of businesses to make sure that they could express in unison our concerns to the legislature that this would be bad for our businesses because it would affect the ability to recruit and retain the best and brightest talent, and also the fact that it would drive away business from our state, give us a brand as a state that's not welcoming to others. And so that was the reason that we worked together with our coalition to keep Texas open for business and defeat the bathroom bill.
Perfect. Okay. Turning it over. Oh, go ahead.
I just want to make one comment. I think Belinda hit this right on the head when she described it as this policy, misguided policy, when in reality, if you dig a little deeper, you realize that it's politics deceptively pretending to be policy, right? So when the lieutenant governor has 23 items that are his priority for the legislative session, and this is a higher priority than, say, school finance or dealing with the uninsured children in this state, that is misguided. He's running to his base. And you see that. Valerie shared some numbers with us just the other day as we were preparing for this panel, that if you dig into the numbers behind the primary election that just passed in Texas, that 90% of Republican voters supported a bathroom bill. And if you think about primaries, on the far end and the far right and left, those are typically the people that get out, the core of both parties. So when 90% of the Republican Party supports that amongst their primary voters, he's running to his base. He's doing something and politicizing the middle of a legislative session when we need to focus on bigger issues for Texas. And I just think that's...
And sometimes it's a lot easier to do that diversion than to have to tackle real issues and try to solve something.
Exactly.
That's another story.
Yeah. And in fairness to our fellow Texans, I'll just say that the way that the question was worded on the ballot was, do you believe that that women and children should be safe in bathrooms? I mean, really, it was not anything at all. Our law enforcement officials stood with the business community at the Capitol and pointed out the fact that there is no threat in Texas Texas bathrooms. So be sure that while you're in town for South by Southwest, you're okay to go to our public facilities without us having a bathroom bill.
So I'll admit to you, I voted in the Republican primaries for some reasons. And in that, I felt really weird saying no. I don't want women and children to go to the bathroom in safe places. But I knew the context behind it. But it is a very sort of, what was the word I used? Sketchy or shady earlier, Duff? Like they're sneaky. They're doing
sneaky. But ultimately, those platform pieces that they put on the ballot are taken to the state conventions, and they use that to set their platforms for the convention. And that's what, then you realize what kind of games they're playing.
Okay, so let's keep going. So, Sandy, I often hear from corporations when I talk to them about what we're doing, and they say, well, if I don't say anything, I won't offend anyone. And IBM is a trusted, experienced brand, established. Like, how did you guys decide to get involved?
Thank you, Deirdre. It was an interesting evolution, I would say. You're right, we're almost 107 years old. We're very astute and adroit on technology and business. When you've been around 107 years, I'm not that old, but the company You have to be adroit, and you have to move on a dime. This issue came up first 2 years before, in the 1915 legislative session. There was a group called Texas Competes, led by an amazing woman named Jessica Shortall, who couldn't be here today. And she wanted companies to sign a petition. There wasn't really specific legislation then, but kind of the foreboding of this. And she wanted us to sign a big petition that Texas should be open for business and non-discriminatory, et cetera. The first reaction was, we don't sign petitions like that. We know who we are. The world knows we're a very innovative company, very strong on diversity and inclusion. And I kept sort of chipping away with the folks in our HR and our government relations areas in Washington mainly. And I picked up an ally or two, and we decided, yeah, we got to do this. We have to do this. We're in a good company. We're not out on a limb. But even if we're out on a limb, it was the right thing to do. So what started 3 years ago now is, well, we don't like to get involved with that kind of thing. Turned last year very quickly into, this is absolutely who we are as a company. We are for absolutely the strongest workforce we can find, the most diverse and inclusionary kind of way of hiring people. And so we were just really strong and very much out in front. It really does speak to our values, to our history of being out there before government laws say you have to do X, Y, Z. So once we really were focused on it, and again, we're a big organization, it took a lot of departments, a lot of kind of checking things through. You got to be careful. You worry about your business, you worry about your image, but this sort of just trumped everything. And we got to do this. This is absolutely the place for us to be.
Awesome. Duff, same question to you. As an executive leading your agency, how did you guys decide to get involved?
I think about it, and all of us, I'm sure, in this room grew up with the notion of the golden rule, right? Treat others like you would like to be treated yourself. And right there it says to me, why would we discriminate against some versus others? That doesn't make any sense. Texas has always been known as a welcoming state, and that's not very welcoming when you start to pass legislation like that, or even what was tried, as Sandy noted, in 2015, which was the anti-marriage stuff. And that's where we got involved with Texas Competes, and then Belinda and Chris reached out to us and said, would you guys like to be involved in this effort against the bathroom bills? And I said, sure, of course, because it's, one, we want all of the people that work at GSD&M to feel comfortable, to bring their best selves to the office and to be authentic in who they are, and to thrive in an environment where they're comfortable and that they feel respected and they feel treated fairly. Secondly, being a welcoming state, that's like hanging a sign out that says, we don't want this type of people here. And for us, in our business itself, is a real tie to the business is, we can't sit in front of our clients and say that we represent and understand the marketplace unless the workforce is reflective of the community. And this community is changing. And therefore, we need to have all of those people together because that's more diverse opinions and more diverse ideas, and that ultimately, I think, makes us better.
It's ultimately good for business, too.
Yeah.
Good for society and good for business. And when you can have all that together, that's where you need to be.
So we'll kind of go to that now. So Belinda, let's talk economics. Texas has earned this reputation of the Texas miracle. Can you talk a little bit about what that is and how the bathroom bill legislation threatened that?
Certainly. The things that we did, as I mentioned, we had an economic impact study that was done by Angelo Economics, a very reputable firm here in Texas, and they interviewed economic development agencies and meeting planners and organizations that tend to bring a lot of business here to Texas. And the things that we knew were hanging in the balance, the economic development corporations pointed out, are things like in Dallas, we were at that time still in consideration for the NFL draft. Fortunately, we were able to win that NFL draft because we did not have this type of bad legislation that would have blocked it. And that NFL draft is going to bring $90 million of economic impact to Dallas, and will support 30,000 jobs. Similarly, coming up at the end of this month in San Antonio, we've got the Final Four, the NCAA Final Four, and the economic impact of that is going to be $185 million. And lots of jobs also supported, and that's because of all the people who will come in from around the country, around the world, which would have been negatively impacted if we had this type of bad legislation involved, because the NCAA had already made a statement. They've done the same thing of moving an event from North Carolina once this legislation was put in place. And I will also give a shout out to South by Southwest, who were also partners in our coalition, because they recognized that this would have also been bad for all the people who wanted to come here for South by Southwest in 2018. So that's the case that we were able to make to the legislators. And I think what was really impactful was when we brought business leaders like from IBM and GSD&M and Gearbox Software we have in the audience. We've got a lot of leading businesses that sat together with some of the legislative leaders. They walked through the Capitol with us, and we went to see different people who had either signed onto the bill or considering signing onto the bill, and they heard about the specific challenges that this would create for their businesses. I also have to give a shout out to Deirdre, because she was one of the great speakers who stood with us at the Capitol and spoke about how Silicon Labs would have been impacted. And you have a wonderful story about the fact that you were trying to bring a great talent.
Yeah, I'm actually going to share that story right now. I'll share that story next. So we'll talk about recruiting. So I had spent several years working in Silicon Valley for a startup, and I had a highly paid opening up on my team. A highly skilled knowledge worker, great salary, and I called a former colleague of mine who was still in San Francisco, and I said, hey, I've got the perfect job for you. You really should consider applying. I think you'd be a great fit. I'd love to have you on the team. And instead of spending my time trying to tell him about the role or the company, I spent my time trying to sell him on Texas and why he and his husband should actually move here, and would they be safe, and is it super discriminatory? And so it was at that moment that I knew we really had a problem as a business, not only as like the social justice issues caused by this bill, but also as a business. It was a real impact. And so, Sandy, I know that IBM also saw this as a threat to your recruiting efforts. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I can't tell you, Deirdre, that we had specific examples, although there were some people who, they even last year during all this, our design studio based here in Austin. By the way, Austin is the site of the second largest IBM, the second largest single facility in the U.S. We got about 10,000 people in the state. So this is our second largest state in terms of population for IBM in the U.S. So this is a very important place. North Carolina, with Research Triangle Park, RTPs are actually our single largest site. So here are these two states, and here we are, IBM. So you kind of can't help but get involved in it, right? I never really heard specific statistics. Gee, we're having people who are threatening to quit in North Carolina, but we didn't want that to happen. We wanted to preempt that. And that really wasn't as important as what is the messaging we're trying to be here? What are we trying to get across? What's the coalition of businesses that want to do the right thing? As we said earlier, the business is so important. We got to get the best talent. That's who we are. We thrive with it. We don't thrive without it. And so even just the threat, the idea of people having to ask that question was enough for us to say, we got to try to nip this. We'd already, in other states where they had the marriage bills, we'd written letters to governors in 2 or 3 states. I could try to sing to that, but I don't think.
This is the
I think it's the South by computer.
Yes, the South by computer.
Tech people, can we turn off that computer? Thank you, Emily. Get the party started.
We'd already sent,
Thumbs off.
in several states, we'd sent letters to governors after legislatures had passed, marriage discrimination bills, asking them to veto. That happened in North Carolina. It happened in, I think, Georgia. It happened in Louisiana. And so we were firmly on the watch for this kind of thing. So again, it's part of who we are. One of the stories that I love that kind of bounces around in IBM is that back in the 50s, you've heard of Watson, the AI. Well, Watson is named after Thomas J. Watson, both senior and junior, the first two CEOs, father and son. And Watson Jr. Made a call to the governor of Kentucky. This is back in the 50s. IBM decided to locate a pretty big site, manufacturing site, in Lexington, Kentucky. It was great for however measures. And he said to the governor, now governor, I know that the official policy of the state is more toward discrimination. I don't know if he probably didn't use those words, but the governor at IBM, we hire African Americans. This is important to us. We are a fully integrated workplace. If that's a problem to you, we don't have to come. And the governor says, oh no, we want you here. So even back in the 50s, long before civil rights laws federally, et cetera, we've been in there. We hired the first woman manager and around the turn of the last century, et cetera. So again, when we look at these issues, we reflect on our tradition and our current need to stay inclusionary, of course, and what's right. This became a slam dunk. And again, as I mentioned before, we had so many elements. We had HR involved with this, our government relations folks, of course, myself in citizenship. So we had a lot of people steering this ship toward trying to do this right thing.
Awesome. So go to the movies now. We'll go to entertainment. Like Black Panther taught us, there's actually money to be made in having some diversity. Yet the Texas legislature, which is heavy Republican, which stereotypically is pro-business, is really running against these, introducing these bills that aren't business. And Belinda, can you talk about what caused this anti-business, anti-equality shift in the last election here?
Yes, certainly. Well, we are great at a lot of things in Texas, but unfortunately, voter participation is not one of them. And as a result, in the primary elections...
Actually, and let me fast forward a little bit. Let me pull up that slide. So if you're going to talk through some of the data, you have it here. Yeah.
The primary elections in Texas have seen very low voter participation. Below 7% of our voters have come out to vote, and that has resulted in in the primaries you get people who are typically on the extremes, for both parties. And because Texas has been such a state dominated by one party, the Republican Party, in our legislature, the primary election cycle, which is when those Republican leaders are truly selected, is the most critical election in our state. We just had our primaries, just wrapped up last week on March 6th, and the important thing is that while we had greater participation, it got up to about 11%. That's still not representative of the millions of Texas voters who should have gone out to the polls so that they could have had their views properly represented. That's what a democracy is, when you have leaders who are representative of your entire state. So we've had a challenge where people who've been able to understand how to take advantage of the fact that we have low voter participation in our primaries have been able to get people who will say things to pander to, as Duff put it, who are considered the primary Republican base of voters. And unfortunately, because they're not representative of people all around our state, they have been focused on some extreme positions like supporting things like a bathroom bill and other types of issues that have not been good for our state and very inclusive. So that's the reason that we at the Texas Association of Business are continuing to work with our coalition members to keep Texas open for business and make sure that we get more people out to vote in the polls. It's our voter education program that we ask business leaders to speak to their employees about the importance of voting. And research has showed that when business leaders speak to their employees about the importance of voting, just like they speak to them about other important things, having a 401k plan, having a health insurance program, all of those things. Voting should be right there in terms of, something that's very important, because when people go out and vote in representative numbers, we'll get true representation, and legislators who will focus on those true priorities for our state, like school finance reform and fixing our
and I could share, we'll bounce back in the beginning, but I'll share one quick story since I have some pictures. On that voter turnout, it's something you can easily do, and something if you do not have a lot of budget or a public affairs team. So last for the primaries, Jackie Paget, wave your hand, Jackie, my counterpart and partner in crime at Silicon Labs on these public affairs efforts, we ran a event called Turnout for Tacos. So we basically said, if you go and early vote with us on March 1st, we will give you tortillas tacos, either the Republican, the Democrat, or the Independent that are on their menu for free. And we had about 42 employees come out, and we had a lot of fun. And in fact, Bloomberg picked it up. And so for a company of our size, we got great media coverage over something that was really, really small, and employees loved it. We had people talking about they'd never voted on the primaries before, and they didn't know. And we kept it nonpartisan, purely educational. Here's how you figure out what's on your ballot, type of information, and it was a great success.
Tacos are very popular in Austin because we in fact did the same thing at GSD&M. Vote for Tacos was our initiative, and if you came back with your I voted sticker, then you got the chance to get a free taco.
What were they? Republican, Democrat, Independent?
No, because we actually have tacos available every day at the office. So Mary makes our tacos, so we just shared her tacos.
Awesome.
I want to make a point to what Belinda was talking about, and it has to do with voter participation and ultimately how we get people out to vote and how we wind up with the type of government that we wind up with. Texas has a history of some very colorful political people. And at a certain point, I do believe it's beyond just the voters to get involved so that we have more diversity of opinions and more points of view get represented, but that we come together as businesses to step out into the discussion when Texas can do things that Texas doesn't really need done, right? How do we help ourselves from helping ourselves, right? We don't need to write another chapter in the crazy book of Texas politics and be on the national stage because we're doing crazy discriminatory things. It just doesn't make any sense, right? So getting involved in an issue like this is part of what you highlighted early on with your 4 points. It's corporate responsibility, it's social responsibility, and the need for us to step into the conversation as businesses and demonstrate that we don't support that type of discriminatory legislation, that we want Texas to be its best, brightest self.
Of our entire state, and we'll have a continuation, and we know that we are already preparing for a bathroom bill to be raised again in the future.
Okay, so I want to, for the people in the room that don't have public affairs programs set up yet, I want to share a little story about how we got thrown into this last year. So the day after Trump got elected, our CEO, Tyson Tuttle, posted an amazing blog post and sent it out to all employees talking about our values. And he talked about how despite the outcome of the election, we are a company that believes in diversity and equality, in the importance of free trade and immigration. And honestly, we got mixed feedback internally. So as someone who runs comms, I was like, crap, we have no plan for this. And so we kind of got thrown into the fire drill of needing to have a more formal public policy program. Now, Duff, as the CEO of GSD&M, how do you decide and balance what's coming from you versus what's coming from the company?
I look at it a little bit like this. I go back to what I said early on. It's about the golden rule, right? And you want an environment where people feel comfortable. You want to be involved in issues and make sure that not just the people that you represent in terms of your employees, but how would your clients respond to this, right? And clients and brands always move in relationship to their consumers. The consumer ultimately owns the relationship and owns the brand. And so what we think about from a business perspective is how does an environment where Texas passes discriminatory legislation stand for us, and how does that help us or hurt us in doing business? Well, it hurts us in recruiting, it hurts being involved with the state with crazy zany laws, and so we want to get involved and choose to get involved for those topics, just like we might get involved with a response to Hurricane Harvey or Katrina with the Red Cross, places where we can step in and use our talent to make a difference. You know, the advertising business is not, we don't sell products, we have ideas. People, the thing that we create are ideas ultimately that make a difference. And so that's where our opportunity to make an impact is to come to the table and use our talents as opposed to writing checks. And so getting involved in an issue like this, we can utilize the skills of the wonderful people that work at GSD&M, tap into our relationships into the community, and then bring together pieces of communication or ideas that can make an impact and get the conversation started. And that's the idea of, you want to step into the cultural conversation, and can we make an impact? Can we disrupt the marketplace with the ideas that we're creating? And then people can sit down and have a serious dialogue about it. And that's where we can feel like we can make a contribution.
Awesome, thank you. So as a marketer, knowing that this was trial by fire for us in public affairs, I was actually really surprised at how much similarity there is between running some public affairs campaign and running a typical marketing campaign. So it's about thinking about who your audience is, what the objectives are, what strategies match that, what are the tactics and technology that you're going to use to accomplish those goals. And I know across the board, everybody has done some really cool, interesting things and activities for the Bathroom Bill campaign in particular. So Duff, I want to turn it over to you, and I also have your video queued up, but I want to turn it over to you. What kind of activities did you do?
So we got involved, and we, were asked by Texas Community Health, and Belinda put us together with the ACLU and Texas Community Health out of Houston, and would we put up some teams together to come up with some ideas about fighting the bathroom bill. And one of the ideas we came up with was a line called IP with LBGT. And so across the course of the communications ideas that we had, one of them was to do some content, some video content that could either be through social media shared, or could we get time donated to get it on the air. And so we reached out to Richard Linklater, who graciously donated his time in order to direct the television spot or the content shoot, which then we were able to work, our team was, and to get it into the marketplace and to do the communications. Later in the session, we got involved with the ridiculousness of the bathroom bill and created some posts centered around if you have a backpack, for example, and what do you need to have about your backpack so you can make sure that you have the proper identification to demonstrate when you go to the bathroom that you should be in that bathroom. Like, how ridiculous is what's going on in terms of this legislation? Again, ideas inserting themselves into the conversation to strike a chord where people will go, wow. And then you start to think about what that legislation is really about. And ultimately, again, an idea can make a difference.
Yeah, and I love that because you really used your employee base and talent in order to help make that impact. So let's go ahead and take a look at the video.
Texas lawmakers want to pass SB 6, the bathroom bill, keeping transgender people from using the bathrooms that they identify with.
Now we can stop the bill, but there's only one way.
You've got to roll up your sleeves, pull down your pants, and pee with LGBT.
You got to take a seat to make a stand.
You got to spray it to say it.
Because this isn't a privacy issue.
And we can take care of ourselves.
Because money should be spent keeping kids in school, not out of bathrooms. Don't run in my hallway.
Because passing that bill discriminates against family and friends.
And me.
And that guy.
Because SB 6 threatens Texas businesses.
And because we damn sure ain't gonna end up like North Carolina.
IP.
IP with LGBT.
Because everybody pees, and everybody deserves a safe place too.
IP with LGBT.
Texas.
So I know for us, we really focused on the PR side of things. So we were more doing press conferences and pitching opinion editorials for publications. Sandy, what were some of the activities that IBM did?
Well, before I get into those, I have to tell you, my year, I told people my year last year was one of pure schizophrenia, because Lieutenant Governor Patrick, who was the force behind the bathroom bill, was also the force behind us getting a bill passed that we were extremely interested in called PTEC, Pathways to Technology Early College High School. I won't bore you with it. It's a different way to look at grades 9 through 14. And so PTEC is the acronym. So between that bill and the bathroom bill, I kept telling my people, I'm doing PEE Tech this year. That was my year. How does IBM choose what issues? Well, what was interesting about this is, like a lot of big companies, we have a big presence in Washington. We have lobbyists, we have people who do business with government agencies and watch out for that and look for RFPs, and we go to the Hill and testify a lot about our technologies in an effort to educate legislators and staffers. Here's what's coming down, here's why high performance computing is a national issue, is a big deal. It's just, those are the kinds of things we do, kind of meat and potatoes. Certainly we have a presence in states, but we don't have a full-time lobbyist here, we have a contract lobbyist here. And we usually try to stay to procurement type issues or, again, some meat and potatoes type things. This, as I said earlier, this kind of erupted in a way where we had never done this kind of thing before at a state level. We took out an ad that you have there in the Dallas, Austin papers. We did this, I think, right before the end of the regular session. At the very last minute, we added San Antonio because that's where Speaker Strauss lives, and we wanted to give him support and really thank him for that. So we don't really usually do ads for issues, but we did here. We brought down during the special session our Senior VP for HR, which had never been done before, our Chief Diversity Officer, some of our local executives here at our site, and we also empowered or deputized, I guess, about more than a dozen, 15 to 20 of our IBMers here at the Austin site. And between all of those visits, or all those different times that we had people at the Capitol, we estimated we saw about 120 of the 150 House members, or the members of their offices. We had never done anything like this on a state level before. And that's striking to be number one. Number two, we can do that kind of thing. We could kind of jazz ourselves up. A couple of the people I spoke with, some IBMers, and we have the smartest people in the world working with us. One person said, I didn't know you could go to a place like a state representative's office and they had people who are paid to listen to you, to work with constituents. That's what democracy is. But it shows you that a lot of people just don't do that kind of thing. And so I think we learned a lot about just engagement, and my title of my organization is citizenship. And I just think we all need to be citizens. At IBM, in terms of corporate social responsibility, there may be 100 or 120 of us across the whole world. We can't do this, and we don't do this on our own. We get volunteers, people who feel strongly about supporting a nonprofit.
So we established our coalition to keep Texas open for business, and invited people to become members of TAB and work in this coalition with us, doing a long list of things, which, so becoming a member also meant you were signing up to help us with the effort. That was the advocacy day visits that we scheduled at the Capitol. We went repeatedly to the Capitol. We also did some great work. It was actually organized by a partner with Red Media Group, Angela Hale. I have to give her a shout out. She helped us to organize some great events at the Capitol, where we brought out law enforcement leaders who spoke against the bathroom bill and how it would make the communities less safe. Faith leaders who came out and said that this is not an issue where we should be discriminating against anyone. This is not the right thing to do from a moral position in Texas. And we also had a great group of outstanding women leaders who came from across the state and said, this is wrong, this is terrible, including a transgender woman and also a mother of a transgender daughter. So, we brought a lot of different, people together, in addition to many major businesses. In partnership with Texas Competes, we were able to document that over 700 businesses had spoken out against the bathroom bill, either through editorials, writing in the media, or making statements, issuing them, and we used all of that information and shared it with the legislature and said, this is clearly not what the business community and the majority of Texans want. We also did some polling in some specific places where there are these Republican primary voters, and we asked them the fair question about, is this an important issue to you, or is it important to you to fix our school finance reform, fix our transportation infrastructure, et cetera. And a very small number of those Republican primary voters said that this was an issue for them. They said that they much preferred having the legislature focus on those important issues. And as a result, as unfortunately it was after it was not passed during the regular session, but then was added for consideration in the special session, we were able to reduce the number of legislators who signed on and said that they would support this bill being brought for debate on the floor. We reduced it by 30 legislators who said, okay, we've now heard from people, we understand that this is not important. And our very courageous speaker, Speaker Joe Strauss, and the chairman of the State Affairs Committee, Chairman Byron Cook, they took that information and realized that their membership was saying this was not an important thing to continue to pursue. So that's how we were able to defeat it the second time.
Perfect. So
I just got a shout out to Belinda and TAB. It took a little guts. This is a kind of a mainstream business organization used to dealing with issues like taxation and regulation and other kinds of issues. So they went out on a line. They've gone out on a line on DACA, on sanctuary cities, which IBM and a lot of our companies have been very supportive of. So it's nice, again, kind of a big tent that TAB has become on this and several other issues. It's become a very comfortable place to be and to be a part of and to service other issues. So Belinda got a lot started with this.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to quickly go through. If what we've been saying today has been inspiring, you're like, yes, I want to do this. I have no idea how to do this in my company. I don't think it'll fly. We put together a quick checklist. So I think the first one is going to Duff's point about just being a good citizen and following the golden rule. That's the first thing. You just have to have good company values to make sure that you can actually get this program up and running. The second is find a mentor or join a coalition. So in starting this, I had no idea what I was doing. I got lost in the Capitol so many times, and I really didn't understand and I had worked actually for a state senator, and yet I still didn't understand what it took to be on the other side. And so actually Sandy was a great mentor, and his colleague Meredith, they just let me tag along the first few times. So I would just follow along, see how they did. She doesn't just tag along, she's right in the front. So that was really helpful, and then joining TAB was great because there was an immediate network of people where we could ask questions to and figure out what they were doing and learn best practices. And then it was just a matter of starting to pay attention, understanding how to follow issues and what those issues were aligned to our company values or directly things that impacted the company, and then finally developing the action plan. So it was actually a lot simpler than I thought to actually get a program up and running. So we want to make sure we've got about 8 minutes left, and we want to make sure we're here to answer your questions. So if you have questions, please step up to the mic.
Hello. Is it on?
Can you turn the mic on?
Okay. So I have two questions. So the first one, I'll just speak really loud.
Okay.
So in terms of making advertising that goes along with, I guess we'll focus on human rights campaigns, do you feel that the arguments are made stronger by the allies of the human rights campaigns or by the people who are wanting the rights themselves?
Question.
I actually think that if you really understand the insight and drive behind it,
Right.
if you get focused on that you're helping to solve that problem, that piece of information or that content will motivate more people to get involved, right? That's the whole goal that we're trying to do with the communication, is how do we clearly break the thing down, and whether you're making fun of like the bathroom bill, it does strike a conversation and makes people realize that there's a very diverse, and I've got a very diverse set of friends, right? You look around and see who you have, right? And that demonstrates that, again, we all want to be treated fairly, and how do we have the most impact? What is the way that we can do that so that we slide into the cultural conversation and disrupt what's happening?
The other question I had is about, since you all were talking about corporate social responsibility, I've been learning about that a lot in my international studies classes. And I know that it's a very slippery slope on how to measure it and how to measure how effective it is. And so I wanted to just know any of your opinions on how you think it should be measured.
Ooh, that's a really good question. You're right. It's hard to, I can't tell you that our business went up 10%. I can tell you, though, just a little anecdote. I was sitting at my desk a few years ago, and one of our sales support people called, and they were the final, best and final offer for a big RFP response. She was in Dallas. She said, "This is for an airline based in Dallas. I can't tell you who it is." Well, there are only two based in Dallas, and I kind of guessed. But everything being equal, they want to know what we do in the community. So in about 30 minutes, I put together a lot of stats, grants that the IBMers make through our charitable contribution campaign. We have a matching grant program. I got that one. We have a little grant program based on volunteer time. We've just done this big engagement pro bono with the city of Dallas. So I gave her all this information. We got the deal. Now, is it because of that? I think everything being equal, you show that you're a good corporate citizen, you're involved in your community, you have people who care, you have people who get involved with things, a volunteer organization that kind of humanizes things. I think it makes a huge difference. There are probably smarter people out. You look at brand awareness, that's another measure. IBM has always had a very high awareness on brand and a good affirmation kind of a feeling. And so we're a data company. We probably don't do enough data on ourselves. The cobbler's kids wear no shoes, right? But I'm firmly convinced that it absolutely helps the business. Otherwise, we wouldn't be doing it.
I think that, I agree with that, but I also think that ultimately the evaluation of activities around social and corporate responsibility deserve to be treated differently. It is not a dollars and cents thing.
Good point.
This is about making a difference for people, creating an environment where people can win and feel comfortable. So stepping out there sometimes require us to make decisions that maybe are not driven by profits.
Right.
But at the end of the day, if you are committed to that and people are involved and want to spend the time getting to know you or go to your website before they decide to maybe go to work for you, they'll understand and they'll see what you stand for, and that in and of itself will make your organization stronger because you'll have people that come to the table that are more open and like-minded, right? And so it has its own values that are much different than the dollars and cents of what we sell.
Yeah, I agree. I call that bottom line versus big picture. We're part of the big picture.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So if voter involvement is so important, would you see the TAB lobbying and really pushing hard for an automatic voter registration law in Texas?
Okay, your check is in the mail.
I have a second question, but that's my first direct one for you.
We actually, we set our advocacy agenda each year before the next legislative session, and that's something that we are working on at this point because we recognize that can help to improve voter participation.
Awesome. That and online voter registration.
Yeah.
I'm on the board. They screwed up and they asked me to chair one of their education workforce committee. I'm on the executive board, and I'm going to be pushing for those.
Yeah.
So,
and that was what you were referring to, online voter registration, correct? Because we've not yet gotten to the point where we can do voting until we get to online voter registration.
Yeah, online voting registration, but also auto registration at DMVs.
Yeah.
I mean, places like Oregon, the state of Oregon, that 90% of the voters get registered automatically when you go renew a license, get a license.
we have a very diverse board and a very diverse population or membership. And so again, we have to thread through all that.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be on our consideration agenda. So thank you for raising
Well,
it.
when you get it out there and you need to publicize it, we'd be happy to step in and help you out.
Yeah, you got it.
The second question, I guess going for this, let's say you're at a company, you love working there, and potentially maybe that company's value, I guess the example I can think of was Hobby Lobby, right? They have a core values that they believe strongly in, right? Based on obviously their religion in that case. So if you were an employee there and you find that your values don't necessarily match up to theirs, is that do you go? Do you find a company that does, despite you maybe enjoying working there otherwise, or do you kind of work within the system? I mean, I think what seems to be a pretty progressive audience here, but I'm just curious if you have an insight on that.
Yeah, I mean, I can speak for me personally, that I would only work for a company that I truly believe in the values they stand for, but I'm also very, very, very aware of my white privilege and standing that I can make that choice. So I think it's a harder conversation to have when you have disenfranchised communities, but maybe Hobby Lobby is the only place in their town where they could get a job. So I think that's where it becomes a lot more complex.
I would agree with that. Sometimes it can be a very difficult place for someone to make that decision. But at the end of the day, I think, at least at the outset, trying to work from the inside to make a difference
Absolutely.
says at least you gave it a shot.
Right.
And if they won't be open-minded, then it probably is a good time to get your resume out. But at least on the inside, you've got a chance that someone on the outside may not at least have. You can go talk to the HR people, you can go talk to the organization, the leaders in the organization, and say, we're on the wrong side of this issue. And if they don't want to change, then that may tell you that, I don't feel comfortable there, because you don't want to be in an environment where you're just not, there's that added stress that doesn't need to be there.
I used to work for a member of Congress a long time ago who represented Austin for 31 years, Jake Pickle. You know what the Pickle Center is. He was a wonderful guy. He was, by DC standards, he was a pretty moderate sort of guy. He was conservative in some ways. He was LBJ, Great Society in a lot of other ways. And he weighed things, he had a very diverse district, and you have to do all that balance. He had people on his staff who probably didn't agree with every one of his votes, but they agreed with a lot of his votes, and they would encourage him, persuade him, Congressman, look at it this way or this way. Sometimes he'd be won over by staff input and constituent input. Other times he said, this is where I really firmly am. So you gotta, there's some balancing act here. I never would have worked for someone who I just totally couldn't believe in. And so that's kind of personal decision, and how much can you get done if that's your role in wanting to try to make change.
So we're technically at time, but
Just
since we have 2 more, we do rapid fire.
I'll say really quick. So basically, I'm kind of curious for y'all's perspective on the chances for the bathroom bill in the next session, particularly with Joe Strauss leaving the House.
100% chance it'll be back up.
I just don't know. I've heard that now they tried, and now let's go on to other things. Between Hurricane Harvey relief and school finance, I think they would have plenty of other topics to deal with, but I just don't know that we have that answer yet.
I hope that they don't deal with it, but I think Governor Patrick will be back at it again, because it's more about the politics for him than it is actually solving the problems for the state of Texas.
Well, then we'll be back at it too.
We'll be back fighting again, yeah.
Last question.
Well, actually, this isn't a question, but since there was no one else in line for a question, I just wanted to say, as someone who lives in Austin and someone who's somewhat involved in the community, that I know that each one of your businesses does a lot more than the bathroom bill. All of you support education. Sandy is on every committee there ever was in the world. And Tab came out with against the really not well known but evil driver responsibility bill, and we really all appreciate every one of your businesses.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
She knows how to shut us up. You don't want to say anything against that. Right? Thank you all for being here.
Thank you.